Welcome to All About Impact, the official podcast of Imagine If Insights and Strategy. I'm your host, Susan Petoyan. All About Impact is the only podcast in the world that is exclusively dedicated to the art and science of creating real and positive impact with data, research, and insights. We push ambitious marketers, practitioners, and users of data, research, and insights to create meaningful, tangible, real-world impact with their work. Join us as we bring you diverse perspectives from hand-picked impact champions, incredible cross-disciplinary leaders who are masters at activating insights to transform business and achieve unparalleled success for their teams, organizations, careers, and of course, customers. Now is the time to venture into the world of influence and impact far beyond data and insights. Tune in today and boldly unleash the impact champion in you. In this episode of All About Impact, we are continuing our love affair with UX research, and my guest is Lola Groppi, Senior User Experience Researcher at VMware, who brings a ton of positive energy, deep passion, especially for qualitative, and a great deal of tactical wisdom on driving impact with UX research in the real world. So question for you. What do an octopus, a flight attendant, and a therapist have in common? Well, Lola argues that impactful UX researchers should act like each of those things. How well do you integrate with other teams and lead with your communication? How well do you reach out and touch all different parts of the organization you're supporting? And how well do you zoom out to see the real business issues facing the company? You have to tune in and start taking notes for this episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of All About Impact. Imagine If's episode dedicated to impact with research, insights, and data. Today, our awesome guest is Lola Groppi. Lola and I go back a little bit. We worked in the past together, and she is one of those amazing UX researchers that once you get to know, you can't forget. I know I'm going to embarrass you here a little bit, Lola, but I'm so excited for this conversation. Thank you so much for coming and being our guest. Why don't we start with a proper introduction, Lola? Tell us a little bit about your background. Our listeners would love to know kind of your career trajectory, and maybe tell us why you got into UX in the first place. Kind of what attracted you into this field.
Sure. No, I'd say probably according to my parents, I constantly asked why. So even from a young age, I've had this fascination for wanting to understand the thought process behind why people do what they do. I'm sure that's very annoying for my parents and everyone around me, but sorry. So you know how it goes.
Yeah.
So my journey into UX was kind of always this connected path, but probably similarly for a lot of others, it's never explicitly called out. Like it's still somewhat this newer industry. So it's not like I went to school and they were like, hey, here's this UX course. So the kids are lucky now. But my schooling, I got my bachelor's in journalism and specialized in advertising. And then I got my master's in advertising and specialized in strategy. So you can kind of see how that goes in this direction.
Yep.
And then top that off with working retail at Macy's. So and waiting tables. So constantly surrounded by people. So I think it always was just a part of me. But going into the professional world, I think, my first professional job was a research associate, this B2B consulting agency. So I feel like that's really where I learned that traditional market research kind of discipline, the techniques that come with that. So I feel like that kind of taught me how to not just be a researcher, but this advisor to clients. So I think it was smart to start off kind of in this more traditional realm and then transition. So that's really what happened next. My next job, that was with a financial institution. And that was just, hey, be a UX researcher and casual at 26 years old. Can you just build a department from scratch? Yeah, sure. Okay. So went to go do that. And I think that's really where, obviously, getting down and dirty with conducting a lot of rapid testing, usability, that's kind of the heart of where that happened. But then starting to learn how to support this cross-functional partnership and be that one source of truth. So it's funny, it's kind of just stepping stones. And then now I'm just kind of landed in that end trajectory, which is just continuing to be a senior, UX researcher, build the department, and keep doing what I'm doing. So that's kind of the career story.
I love that. It's a little bit of a zig and zag, but it's also not completely like random, right? The through line is your curiosity, your natural curiosity, which I don't think is annoying. I am in that bucket as well.
This is why we get along.
But I think the key theme for you has been kind of ask the why, figure out kind of how to build things, how to build teams, always challenge yourself, right? Like always look for new difficult questions to ask and advise, folks around you, etc. So I think this is such a perfect conversation. Obviously, the whole podcast for us, Lola, is dedicated to this idea of making a difference with research, right? And in this case, research, UX research, right? And maybe the question is asked a lot more on the traditional research side, maybe not, I don't know. But it feels like it should be a little bit easier maybe to kind of think about the notion of impact in UX, right? When you're building, product apps and experiences and websites, whatever, right? But maybe not. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into this. How can UX research be leveraged to drive like really good, meaningful change in product decision making? Product decisions are complex. I mean, all business decisions are, but I think in product there's often like you have 18,000 features and you have to figure out which ones are the right fit at the right time, which ones you want to put
out. Casual.
So how do you kind of leverage UX research to push those decisions, those like rubber bandy decisions?
Yeah. Oh man, I feel like it depends on the day and what version of me you get that day. But our entire goal as researchers is to help our partners understand how usable, intuitive, and useful their digital solutions are. Yep. So our hope is that they're leveraging those insights by actually building what people want and need and like fixing the issues that have been identified. Yep. But I think user experience, it doesn't just apply to a researcher, experience. It's a holistic, cross-functional thing that everyone has to have a role to play in this delivery. So I think folks are more likely to leverage our insights when they have a stake in the game. So for example, in my consulting days, like which I talked about in the beginning of this kind of my first job, we always had to give these very specific recommendations. Whereas now in UX, like we don't explicitly tell our PMs and designers, what to do and how to do it. Like they're the experts in that way more than me, which thank goodness, because like, please do not put me in Figma. But, it really gives others the opportunity to drive that change in their own areas that are different than mine. So I think that's probably like a key difference that I would go with.
Yeah. Even though you make it sound so simple, right, Lola, it's
my job.
It's still complicated. You still have a lot of nuance. So maybe give us a couple of situations from, anywhere, throughout your career, examples of contexts or situations that you think UX research outcomes, research insights are most likely to actually drive product strategy.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking.
And of course, that always depends on like where the stakeholders are most interested and invested in. So like minus all of those kind of natural things. Unfortunately, I think we have the most influence when our insights contradict an idea that someone has or something that someone wants to build. It can be humbling, to be able to break that down to someone, like why their solution won't be adopted and be able to have those customer recordings or analytics to prove it. But I think what sets us apart is that we don't just like swoop and poop on an idea and like leave people hanging. Like we try to handhold and offer this path forward that's based, again, on this actual customer feedback. So I kind of feel like that's where we get a little bit deeper. Like they ingrain us into their process. They're ingraining us in things that you would think have absolutely nothing to do with us. Like, hey, we're about to like give story points to these user stories. Like, can you let us, like, we want a column with your ratings. Like, okay.
Nice. So being integrated, talking, early or as much as possible, right, is key there. I also think it still takes a little bit more than just reporting. I think what you were kind of leading us to is this notion of, what does it take to bring in bad news, right?
Yeah.
Does it take to call the baby ugly or whatever the case might be, right? Even though it's not usually kind of how you think about impact, like it's really the opposite in some ways, right? It's negative impact, but in a positive.
Yes.
Let's break that down a little bit for those who might not be very familiar, but what skill sets, like what tools do you use? I mean, other than the data and like different cuts of the data, etc. But what does it take to be in that situation and take the team in the direction that, the findings require, right? From whether it's a 180 or 90 degrees or whatever the change is. Like, what do you tap into? What skill sets, what tools do you tap into to help that change in thinking and seeing the world or them in a different way?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's a really good one. I think the fact that it kind of goes to the part where how do we ensure it's not a one-off? Like It's all kind of connected. To me, my answer is actually very similar to that, which is the key is just inviting those people from the beginning, like the cross-functional stakeholders, like making sure they're there, because nothing's worse than presenting a sound research report and like hearing how you missed the mark because it didn't account for something that you had no idea about. And even if we're not pivoting, like if it's just, there's more to, I think what we always bring about is that there's just more to answer. I think a lot of teams, they just scratch the surface and we just try to explain, like you can't just leave it here. Like we're not saying it's a total no, but like just do a little bit more due diligence. And I find that a lot of people just don't know what that means or where to start. So again, that's why they're bringing us for the ride. Like they love a lot of the techniques and discipline that we have. It's like they want some of that. So I find that we get invited to a lot of, hey, can you facilitate a little workshop to like help us just align internally and figure out what feature sets we want to put in MVP? Like that usually has nothing to do with us, but we're getting invited to those conversations.
Right. And that is beautiful, because that is impact in a it's tangible because you're going in and doing the workshop, moderating, etc. But it's also way beyond in many ways, right? Like the written job description of the department. I mean, I don't want to extrapolate too much from that example, but it is like people changing. It is like org chart changing, right? Because you are now stretching, in different directions and touching different decisions or decision-making processes that are far beyond like, okay, which one do you like, or what do you see when you do this, right?
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure that happens often with you, but it's not always the case. But how does the UX community think about that as a dimension of making a difference, a dimension of having an...
It just depends. I mean, I always tell people research, we're part flight attendant, part therapist. And now I'm like, I probably would expand that to like so many other things. So, but that's what I go for. That's why I like UX. I found that when I was more in that traditional market research, the skill set was kind of contained, which is great, to each their own. I need to be an octopus and like have my arms in a million different pots.
Right.
And so I just, again, the way that our brains work and the fact that we're not just trying to be strategic, but we're thinking holistically about the customer at all times. So, and sometimes for other roles, it's just such a hard thing to picture.
Yeah.
So we're kind of, again, those advocates, but I can't even articulate it. It's just, it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, but I think it elevates the conversation to kind of at a higher level a little bit. Like I love that octopus example, because a lot of researchers of any flavor, right? We tend to be a little bit more, I don't want to say introverted, present company not included, but they're a lot more like,
depends.
They exist. Like, you want a number, I'm going to give you a number. I'm going to work really hard to get that number to be the best number, but I'm not going to really, really, really ask a ton of questions about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, because my purpose, my energy, my work, my hours, whatever, going to getting that number to you, right? Like you were saying, you zoom out, or you look at more holistically, globally, and that allows you to be at the very least relevant on many more levels, right?
Oh, yes.
But also influential in ways that, again, if you were just to stick to your lane, you wouldn't be able to. So I love this idea of like, if you want more impact as a UX researcher, if you want to be more impactful, research leader, UX research leader, right? You need to have that connection, but also, right? When folks invite you to come to do a session, so we figure out, prioritize our features really well, there is some inherent trust there, right? That requires you to get out of your office or wherever it is, right? Great. These are some very, very interesting like elements that don't come to mind. Like they're not the first things you think about when you're saying, let's define impact when it comes to UX work.
You actually said it really well. You started to say something about even organizational structure. I was just going to add this. That's, I think, why we backhandedly end up getting involved in so many things, is that the success of research is actually dependent on how well the organization and its teams function, when they're working together. So I feel like sometimes I end up turning into HR, which I don't mean to, but the research teams that I've been on, like we've always followed some sort of framework, like the double diamond, or had some sort of process, which, it's obviously the type A in us. Yeah. But when I go into these new jobs, that's my compass. Like regardless of what the rest of the org is doing, like I know what I'm going to follow. But many UX teams, and especially ones that are transitioning from waterfall to agile, they do not have processes in place to collaborate smoothly together. So it's like, how can they integrate us when they don't even know how they should work without us? So this may sound kind of dumb, but we found that, many teams just don't share how they're doing things. And so a way that we try to combat that is just by leading that communication charge and educating partners on our process, sharing these visuals of how they can work with us, like just specifying up front, like, hey, this is what we need, or here's what we're going to need in order for you to work with us. Like, it just gives them time to coordinate and really fit into our structure, or we fit into their structure.
Right.
And it just prevents a lot of unnecessary work. So that's kind of how that integration comes.
Yeah. I love that. Again, it gives our listeners a little bit of a map of how to kind of think about this a little bit more beyond the geography of your department or your function, right? But I also feel like, Lola, not every UX team that I at least work with operates like that. So
probably not
a cultural thing, like, in the situations you've been in, or maybe it's your own kind of personal preference or approach, etc. But it sure creates for better integration, for better results for everybody, including ultimately the user, right? Because this whole thing is about the user.
All about them. 100%.
Yeah. What are some of the most important kind of factors, considerations you take into account when you're presenting your results to product marketing executives and decision makers? It's a slightly different maybe audience, right? Again, I don't know if you speak different languages for all these people.
I know 50 languages.
But
good old English the whole time.
Yeah. Tell me what goes into kind of how you tell your stories about what you've learned, above and beyond kind of summarizing and making the case with just evidence, right? Like, what goes into influencing in presentations or results share out?
Yeah, and if everyone's picturing like a typical usability report, this is what they couldn't find this button. Yes, like we do all of that. Like that goes without saying.
Just like level one, right?
Yes, and make your headline punchy. Like, yes, we all know that. I think, and this one is probably another but like you'd be
change your voice, punchy, like you went
punchy. I know, I'm an exuberant person. The arms will be flailing. I told you, buckle up. So I think tying it all back to the objectives, like we always want to uncover the feedback that we didn't necessarily anticipate, because like who doesn't love a cool, like, did you know moment?
Right.
But at the end of the day, it has to tie back and actually answer the why and the how to those objectives. Otherwise, it's just not relevant. Like, especially agile, you're moving in 2 weeks, like within every 2 weeks, something is getting launched. Like you don't have the time to be like, yeah, I found out this stuff that's completely unrelated. Like, so make it actually relevant to what you're trying to solve for. And then tailoring the content. Like, I mean, I don't know about you, but like we are all just burnt out with the Zoom calls, the presentation. So if we're going to take the time from others, like make sure, again, it's relevant for them. I know this seems like this shouldn't be said, but you'd be surprised. A way that we do that is we'll have call outs and we'll separate them by role. So like, what does this mean to you as a PM? Like, what should you do next as a PM or consider as a PM? What does this mean to you as a designer? What should you consider as a designer? Sometimes we'll even have some for engineering. It just depends on the ask, but we try to give actionable things to different individuals. Again, this holistic experience, we all play a role. So I think tailoring that content, and then probably the cherry on top of it is just be realistic and flexible. Like, you want the improvements to be attainable. You don't want to set people up for failure. So we try to give that nice balance of things that can be addressed immediately, maybe some things that 3 months from now when you have more engineering capabilities, or hey, like we know that this is not going to probably be a thing. Like, let's go ahead and have that slotted in for, a long-term roadmap and get that in the backlog. So that's kind of what we try to do.
I love this. So I'm going to quickly recap just to make sure that our folks, listeners, are kind of tracking along. One is, of course, you have to do the basic facts of what you learned. So that's like ticket to entry, right? You got to have that.
Okay.
After that, though, you do, I don't know, is it curation or is it translation? But you make sure that whoever is around the table or a Zoom screen or whatever, that they have their version of the truth or their level, their altitude of the truth that they're hearing in their own quote unquote language, right? And that takes extra work and extra planning, but also knowledge of what these people want, what they care about above and beyond their job description. And then the last one, which I forget now, was,
realistic.
Yeah, the realistic. That to me is fascinating because like as someone who is obsessed with like making a difference with this work that we do, right? It's a slippery slope, I think, to say, hey, you need to improve these things, but I want to push you a little bit more to improve like one more level above that. But then as a realist, as someone who has to, work with limited resources and sprints and all kinds of pressures, you have to decide where is that line
on the totem pole,
right? Yeah. So tell me a little bit about more. And how does that decision making in your brain or in your team's discussions, whatever, how does that correlate with the internal team's product, whoever it is, right? Actually acting on it and delivering on time, delivering well, building the right things, or even overdoing some of those things, over-delivering or achieving a little bit more?
We're lucky that we developed this close bond with our PMs. Like they want us to be in certain conversations. But if, obviously our organization is huge. So like,
right,
we can't talk to everyone. So a great way that when we're kicking off these projects is there's a lot of due diligence we do up front. I think a lot of researchers probably are like, cheers to that. Like the more due diligence you do from the beginning of your project kickoff, the smoother you're going to have it. And so we actually ask a lot of questions like, do you have engineering capabilities? Because if someone says no, like that really, I might give different levels of recommendations. Like, for example, like what do they not need coding or engineers for? Like what's something that they can just put on the front end versus the back end that takes no resources?
Yeah.
So like we'll go into the study like knowing that, being able to prioritize like which ones you guys could really focus on now versus later. So we do ask about the resources that these teams have. We will ask about like what do you have going in to beta, or like, because like if something is slotted to go into this like beta environment, like again, we're going to need to act a lot faster maybe on that workflow than like this other workflow we tested. So again, that's just helping us divvy up like our battles and like what kind of recommendations we give.
That is so powerful because that is basically intimate knowledge based on communication, build, trust and everything else, right?
Communication.
That is knowledge of like what is actually going to be actionable before you even go into maybe whatever the test is, whatever the research is, right? So that you design to it, but also you're allocating your time properly and all of those good efficiency arguments, but also making sure that it is set up to succeed, like you said. And what I love about that is that it's all freaking proactive, right? You're not doing this at the end. This is such a big deal.
I'm so glad I've painted the illusion that we're proactive. Thank you so much.
That's hilarious.
Still working on that.
But no, I mean, okay, at least it's a proactive tendency in your thought process, right?
Yes.
Whether it happens or not, reality is a separate conversation. But I feel like in non-UX, situations, UX research situations, it's like someone comes to you and says, I need 2 focus groups. And the thought of like, what the heck are you going to do with these insights? Like,
yep,
that doesn't happen as much as it should. I mean, I'm not saying this is all black and white, but it doesn't happen as much as it should because we're wired or, the industry or we're like, let's just do it what we're being asked, as opposed to, I'm going to claim that have a relevance to the broader business, to a whole bunch of stakeholder groups and not just one team, such as marketing or finance, whatever under, right? And I think that directly ties to kind of how great the outcomes are and how good they are and how much quickly decisions are made, how the quality of decisions, so on and so forth.
Yep. And it's actually kind of nice too if someone does have a little extra time, like maybe they don't have the engineering resources. Well, then great. Now we can launch a bunch of these unmoderated tests, capture some data analytics, like get some more information. And then when it is time for us to play, we know what we're working with. Yeah. So like there's always something that we can give them.
I love that. Very good. You guys aren't doing like exploratory, segmentation or whatever. you have something concrete.
Once in a great while, but it's definitely more UX specific to your point. Yes.
You have a clear direction, hopefully, or destination. You know what you want to make, even though that might move a little bit. You don't know when you're going to get that perfect fit and all of that. My question is about differences in opinion between like different teams, right? Marketing might want one thing, design might care for something else. There's always that senior VP of something or other who's like,
I love curmudgeons. Give me the curmudgeons in my meeting. I'm so down. Like, let's do it. I get them all the time.
So
I've seen it everywhere.
How does that tie back to the outcomes being powerful, impactful from your work?
Yeah, I think, and sorry if I'm repeating myself, but it goes back to just as soon as an ask is given to us, it's like, okay, well, who at all do we include? And then I get that name and then I say, cool, think again, give me some more.
Right.
We don't want to limit it. And the best way to, I know I call them curmudgeons, but it's like, I know you can picture someone specifically when I say that.
No names mentioned.
But
yes.
It makes it a lot easier to have those people in the room because they feel like their voice is being heard. So that's, let them feel like they're being heard. And so we just really try to make sure that, again, marketing, what kind of questions do you have that you want answered? PM, what do you have? Like, we make it a point to ask every single person. A lot of times there's definitely commonality. You can see, okay, here's a story. Like I can build upon this. But then sometimes that curmudgeon, they're a little separate. They've got a little bit of a different ask that you're like, kind of not related, but interesting. So we try to meet in the middle, where can we add probes or give them that value that they're looking for? But if it really isn't going to fit that mold of a project, like we will offer to help them in a different way. Like maybe they need a separate project. It just depends. But to that point before, like we never leave someone hanging. We don't just swoop and poop. Like let's take this offline. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So for us, I think just getting a chance to have everyone there helps us. We love to use benchmarking to our advantage. We're not quite where we need to be, but we're really starting to dabble in it. But we have a data analytics tool called Pendo. So that really shows you like, time on task, heat mapping, workflow journey. So where are people going when they're using our solutions? Before that, there wasn't a quantifiable way to know if improvements were actually improving the experience, whereas now we can compare over time. So using that tool to our advantage is really helpful in these conversations. Like now we have proof when things aren't working. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. So in traditional research, Lola, there is a lot more room for gray areas or, opinions or subjectivities, right? But perhaps in UX research, there's less of that. Things are a lot more like concrete. You have quant, you have analytics, you have visuals, you have real humans with video and all of that.
Yes.
But I suspect that there's still times where credibility or as the messenger, your opinion gets questioned, maybe, or, questions about credibility might come up. Like, I don't really believe that. I don't really think that. In normal research or in traditional research, that's a barrier to impact. Like if an executive or, someone says, I don't believe that, like back to square one, you have to read hard on that. Are there situations like that in UX research that we need to think about barriers to having effective work done, having good results after any of the insights work? And how do you handle those, if there are any?
It definitely happens. I think all researchers, it's like, don't shoot the messenger. Like, I'm just telling you what they said. So I think we've all been through it. I'm lucky that where I'm at now, like they've never had research. So it's like everyone's so dang excited that like I don't have as much of that, like, I don't know if I trust this. It also helps that, again, everyone has been looped in from the beginning. We've done that due diligence. We've crossed our T's, dotted our I's. And then everyone was invited, to observe our research as we were conducting it. So by constantly involving people, I find that I get less issue with this credibility because they were there too. So that helps. Obviously, if someone is very high up and like simply will not have the time to sit on something like that, don't blame them. I think what sets us apart, besides the fact that our work will speak for itself, is show them your analysis. I find that that's where the silence comes in, where they're like, oh, that's where I think they see, like, for example, we just did a humongous card sort / tree test for information architecture, for a navigation menu.
Yep.
And there was that where it was just like, I don't know, like if this is like really like true, or, if this numbers are really true. And it was like, well, let me show you the analysis. And it's like, look at the coding, look at the different, metrics that we were calculating, like success rate, time on task. Like these are things that like they would not have thought about, like which they shouldn't have. I mean,
that's not their job.
They're not their job.
Yeah.
I would hope I bring that to the table.
Yeah.
So I really find that showing that gives you another sense of credibility. So I don't know, again, if this is answering your question, but that's a helpful one.
I think it's a very interesting nugget there that, again, we don't automatically think about. But it's basically, you're saying use the rigor of the analysis as an influencing tool, right?
Yes.
It also parallels with your other idea of like bring them along the journey. Like when you open up the gory behind the scenes of everything that you've done to come to your conclusions, they're really going through that pain themselves as well.
Yes.
And it kind of dissipates, hopefully, a lot of the difference in opinion or perception that this is, there might be another truth or another kind of way to look at this. Very powerful. I love this. Okay.
I had one more. I know it's so hard to let it go. I was just going to say the other thing to keep in mind is like, again, our work is we're never trying to position it as a one-off. So because we don't position it that way, and we're giving them recommendations of like, maybe these are some next steps you can have for internal alignment with engineering.
Yeah.
Here are the next steps of what we can do for you for research. So we actually give them different avenues, whether it's with us or other teams, to keep that validation going. So they're still getting answers to those questions that maybe we didn't uncover, or it gives more context than what we figured out. So it's never done.
Fascinating, because again, going back to how do you measure whether something is really effective and actionable and impactful, it starts with there being some kind of a finality, or like, okay, we did this, and now you're going to act on this, right? But in your case, or in the case of UX, when you're building things and they take a long time and you have to iterate and pivot and change, right? Whatever the case might be, you don't have that benefit of like, okay, at this point, it flips.
It's never final.
to use this and to do this, you don't really have that. But you're looking at it sounds like as a platform of relationship building and collaborating and ongoing, like everybody around the product, whatever it is we're building together, working together.
Yes. And that's where the whole Pendo, analytics, benchmarking, like, again, we haven't dabbled in that as much as we want to, but that kind of gives you a little bit of a finite result. Like, V1, when we launched it performed like this, but now we're going to refresh. Yeah. Here's V2. Now we can compare. Oh, that actually got more clicks. Okay. So again, that helps us with keeping things going.
Great. This begs the question of, well, when is it done? Or is it ever?
It's never done, Susan. It's never done. I mean, there's certainly things where you're like, all right, we've helped that team enough. They've had 5 rounds of high fidelity testing. Like, I think it's safe to say that that's probably good. I think what we do with that one, again, to close the loop is, all right, what pixels and triggers can we set up to collect the analytics? So if we have the bandwidth to come back to this later, at least we know how it's performing. So I would say that's probably how something ends.
Another question that I think comes up related to this, maybe not so much, but let me ask it anyway. The question is this. Again, in these situations where you're testing, you're kind of, looking at ideas and trying to figure out kind of how to prioritize them, when to build, how to execute them, so on and so forth, right? You're already working with pre-existing concepts, ideas, features, whatever, right? The idea for a space and room for exploration is more within the things that you're given, right? As opposed to like totally out there, we're exploring something new. We don't know what the needs are even in the first place, etc. And I don't know, depending on the team situation, the product, it's probably a different ratio for exploratory versus a little bit more traditional UX. But do you think it's harder to show results, to be effective, to have that true impact when you're like at the very beginning or exploring or looking at kind of very high level? Or do you think it's equally impactful because ultimately you guys are going to build something, hopefully, once you explore and get to things that you need to.
Yeah. So it's funny, the business wants us to prioritize more of the rapid testing, like just get the baselines, get the usability, bam, bam, bam. But a lot of the requests that we're getting, because again, you just need one advocate. Like as soon as you get those advocates, they come right on back. So there are a core set of advocates that keep coming back that are like, we have a new idea for a tool that does not exist in the industry. You know, we want to validate if we should build it. And there are some that we are able to support them and do that, which we're on some now. And it's at the point where we've done 4 to 5 phases. We validated we're going to build it. We're trying to get a beta going, like off to the races. So we still do a lot of that strategic exploratory work. But we are trying to prioritize more of those, like I said, the usability testing. So it's really interesting. But the teams, again, that we're lucky, the ones that are coming to us, they want the results. They want to hear what we have to say. So the credibility is still there. I think what's always interesting is that the research can only do so much. Like we can only tell them so much. There's a lot that we end up telling them, like, you know, now this is in your hands. Like you as the product owner need to actually own this. Like go shop this around with customers. Go look at competitors. Go talk to engineering. That's the other layer that I think catches them off guard. Where like they kind of know that they need to be doing that, but then it's like they're almost waiting for a different type of recommendation. Where then when we're like, no, go have these conversations. It's like, oh, I thought you were going to just tell me what. So it's just kind of funny.
It's very, very interesting. One more probe on this, I think, again, another flavor of the same theme. As someone who cares about consumers and users and people out there, right? I'm going to guess or assume that there is a little bit of a dissatisfaction deep down somewhere in your heart and mind about, this one thing that is really powerful, is really good, consumers want it, is needed, etc. It's going to be roadmap to later for like round. And you know that if that thing was available now, if we're able to squeeze that in, it's going to be like 100 times better. I mean, how do you deal with that voice inside, that intellectual like dissatisfaction of like, when you're so close to consumers and you know that's that one element, that one build, that one extra thing that would have made a huge difference.
Oh, I mean, I had like a little Post-it where I'm like, I'm always looking to see like, where's that at? But like, there's plenty of designers, they have their little ones that they think the same. The PMs have the same ones. So like, we're all in the same boat. So it happens all the time. I find that you can only do your best to be the advocate and explain why it's a problem. And, you know, and if it can't get prioritized and it just, you know, it's not going to happen, I usually swallow that. Like, I'm like, okay, but what will I do in the meantime for when they're ready? So it goes back to all those other things I talked about. Like maybe I'll set up a trigger in the back end, you know, to help prove my point. Like, is there drop off on that spot because that thing isn't there? There's plenty of times in interviews that have nothing to do with that product that I'll hear it and I'm like, like I'll make another note. And I'll even have like a sheet where I have all those different topics and I'll put those recordings with a timestamp. So when I go into these conversations, I can be like, actually, I heard this 4 more times. Give them those recordings, hear it for yourself. I think the other thing we do is we're going to be spearheading an all hands. Like right now we're integrated with the design all hands. So it's just design and research, but now we're going to have our own separate one. And I think that will help set a tone. Like I'm hoping that will be another way we can reiterate some of those ongoing issues that keep coming up. We are also trying to, I think coming back in numbers can only help you. So we try to, at the end of each quarter, we're going to get better about this. We try to show like an aggregate like pulse check. Like here's what we've heard consistently this quarter. And then we'll even have like a snapshot from the previous quarter. We're like, look, that thing is still there. 2 quarters in the row, baby. We've been hearing that same thing. So we try to do that too, so that people know the frequency that something's coming up, because that's part of it too. They just maybe don't believe that, like, maybe it's not really a problem, but when it comes up for a whole year, that's a little bit different. We also try to put it in the backlog. So at least if those other tickets are done, like maybe then they'll come back to it and there's a story for it.
Yeah. I love this. So it's kind of like being the steward of the problem, even if the problem is not urgent yet, being obsessed enough with it that you have ways to creatively still gather data without dedicating resources to it. But this takes foresight, it takes passion. It takes a certain level of intentionality, right? When you're working with teams and collaborating or establishing a team, a department, as is the case in your situation. Awesome. This is the last question before my three other questions, but the question about you laid out so many different kind of tactical things, but also kind of mindset and kind of approach, almost like strategic things, right? that are part of your toolkit, part of your approach to work. But there must be something else that you're frustrated you're not able to do. Like if you had the magic wand.
Oh, I always ask customers that. How dare you research
one
me?
Thing that will turbocharge even more insights coming out of your UX work.
I know people will be shocked to hear that I prefer qualitative over quantitative, but it's not my thing. And UX is a very metric heavy sort of area, and not that market research isn't, but you could really pick your lane and kind of stay in that lane, and you can't really do that in UX. And as we dabble more in data analytics and we want to do those baselines and get the benchmarking going, I only know so much. I literally am writing a job rec now for someone to hopefully we can hire in the next year or so to really spearhead some of that, because I'm not an expert in that world. And it's very hard to find things out there about it that make sense to a non-quant person who had a math tutor since third grade. So it's not my thing. So I think that's probably where I'd be oh, I need help.
Interesting. The way I'm going to kind of recap that and put it into the bucket of another way to think about impact is the multidisciplinary, kind of the left at all sides of your brain. Make sure that you're aware of what within your team, any areas that you need to build up and beef up resources and skill sets, etc. Whether it's numbers or qual or whatever it is, right? That is a requirement to being an effective team that does great, impactful work.
Probably 100%. I think the other thing is be honest about your downfalls. I'm very upfront with our people. Y'all, this is as far as the quant road goes for Lola. This is the info. Don't ask me anything outside of this. I think it's totally great to own what maybe you're not that great at, because at the end of the day, no one else is there to do it. And they're so thankful that someone is. And those techniques and disciplines that our brains have, that translates. Even if you're not a quant person like myself, take those qual disciplines and it can be applied in a quantifiable way. So awesome. It's I just kind of work it within what I can do.
Yeah, which is, again, a very valuable, useful insight, especially when you're in front of designers who want all kinds of things and product people and executives who are kind of in their own worlds and, far from reality at times, right?
Yes.
Awesome. This has been so rich and insightful on so many levels, Lola. But let me ask you these three questions. This is how I've asked all our guests so far. And every time I learn something new. So the first question is, tell me one thing that you do in your own kind of daily life as part of your work or just personal life in general that that results in positive impact, positive outcomes, maybe for the greater community, people beyond you, people beyond your team. Any examples that come to mind that you would be willing to share?
I laugh because I'm man, this is such a Midwest answer. But I was just going to say, just ask at least one person every day how they are. I, especially now that I work fully remote, I'm sure everyone else is thankful that they don't have to run into me in the water cooler, because I love a good chat. But especially with everything being remote, I really try to make sure, whether it's a quick huddle or just a ping, just ask someone how they are. There's a lot of people who are working very much siloed and not getting that face-to-face time. So probably
I
that.
love that. Ask how they are and actually mean it, right? Yeah. Very good. I love it. The flip side, what would you recommend our audience members, people listening to this episode, for them to do something small, again, part of their daily work, personal life, to have better impact in the world?
This is probably hard to do these days. I know I struggle, with the world the way that it is now, but just be kind. I have to be extra aware of I don't know what that person's going through, or there's enough of this negativity flying around. just be kind. Give someone the benefit of the doubt, or give the situation the benefit of the doubt. So yeah, kindness.
Yeah.
I know it's really cheesy answer, but we need some of that.
There's always room for more cheese. There's a lot of cheese in the world.
Always more room for more cheese. Or a cookie. Always down for that.
Yeah, it's free. In this case, generally being kind, being nice is free. So shouldn't cost anyone anything. Lola, this has been not only fun, informative, and like
I missed you, Susan.
Personally, but I think our audience is going to have a blast listening to this and taking a ton of notes. But if people wanted to learn, get in touch with you to have more direct access to some of these amazing insights.
Always available.
What's the best way to find you? I think you're on LinkedIn. I know you're on LinkedIn.
Good old LinkedIn. Lola Groppi. The good classic LinkedIn. Can't miss me. I think I'm the only Groppi on LinkedIn.
It's Lola, right? Is it Lola or Lauren? Or is it both?
I've got both. You never know which name someone may find, but yeah, Lola.
Awesome. The one and only, ladies and gentlemen. This is so cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Lola, for giving your time, for sharing, for the candor and the generosity of your insights. I know I learned a ton. I know people listening to this will learn a ton. I really, really appreciate having you. And I hope we do this again sometime in the future.
Too. If not, let's hope people got some giggles along the way. That's a victory.
I know they did. That's one way to measure impact.
Measure impact with giggles. I agree. Can that be? I want that to be a metric.
There you go. We just need to build some kind of analytics tool around that.
Would that be like an AI sort of thing? Who knows?
I don't know.
Well, thank you, Susan.
Awesome. Have a great one, Lola. Thank you. Thank you. As you heard in this episode of All About Impact, if you're not operating like an all-relevant, proactive, well-integrated UX team, how well are you positioned to drive actual impact with your work? And what is your formula of driving impact within your organization? Impact is the next frontier of research and insights, and it could be a lot easier with the right partner next to you. Reach out to me, Susan Petoyan, on LinkedIn, and let's together discover the impact champion in you. Tune in next week for another episode of All About Impact.